Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, good night, depending on where you are in the world. I'm in the UK, in London, and my name's Kate Isiche, and I'm a neuro inclusion consultant. And apologies for anyone who tried to join my live stream yesterday. It didn't happen. It's supposed to be every Tuesday at 1:30, but I wasn't able to run the session yesterday, so I'm doing it today on New Year's Eve in the Western world. For those of you who are celebrating New Year's tomorrow, Happy New Year's Eve to you all. Just to introduce myself, for those of you who don't know me, I'm a neuro inclusion consultant, as I said, and I work with managers, particularly leaders in organizations, to help them to understand neurodivergence, particularly neurodivergence in the workplace. And I have so many conversations with people who know of neurodivergent children, autistic children, children with ADHD, children with dyslexia, children with dyspraxia, and so many other neurotypes like OCD and Tourette's, but they don't recognize those same traits and behaviors in adults. And this is why I'm constantly having this conversation about what neurodivergence looks like. So that's the topic of today's Q&A. And if you have a question, please feel free to submit it via the chat, the comments on LinkedIn, on the live stream. Or if you don't feel comfortable doing that, you can DM me privately and send me an email with your questions so I can follow up on that. Sort of, so you don't have to, reveal your name or reveal where you're from. I'm happy to communicate with you privately because I know sometimes these conversations can be quite intimidating, particularly if you know nothing about neurodivergence. And I was there myself 6 years ago. 6 years ago, I knew very little about neurodivergence and had to learn through experience, the hard yards of having neurodivergent family members who've gone through some significant challenges as a result of their neurodivergence and also of the way that they are treated in this world. And that's the reason why I started off my business. I mean, Where to Look Communications is a communications consultancy originally, but I pivoted, as the people used to say during COVID, to focus on neurodivergence because a lot of the experiences that neurodivergent people have that are challenging are around communication, and the fact that neurotypical people or non-neurodivergent people don't understand the presentation and communication around neurodivergence. And for so many people, the way that they communicate is completely natural. It's not put on or forced in any way. It's completely authentic. And so if you have a neurodivergent employee, an autistic employee, an employee with ADHD, more than likely, I mean, I know that we tend to use the term neurodivergence as a catch-all, and it's a very handy term, and there are crossovers for sure. There's overlaps between the different neurotypes, but they are quite distinct. I think it's also quite worth mentioning that because often people will assume that neurodivergence is this sort of one global condition or one global neurotype with lots of little variations, but actually it's not that. It's very distinct neurotypes, very distinct brain wiring that means they interact with the world differently, they communicate with the world differently, their social interaction with other people, neurodivergent people, as well as neurotypical people differently. But I use the term neurodivergent because it's easier than just saying autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, and so on. It's a catch-all term that is something that I use quite a lot, but I think it's worth raising the point that actually they are very distinct, each of those neurotypes. And the reason why I wanted to talk today and answer questions today about neurodivergence and what it looks like is because many people understand neurodivergence in children. They see autistic children in their family. They may have a nephew or a niece, um, or someone in the family who is neurodivergent but very young, a child, and therefore they see excitability, child like presentations and behaviors and traits that are sort of mixed up with the neurodivergence. But of course, childlike behaviors and traits, move away once you're no longer a child. Even when you're a teenager, they're no longer present. And therefore, the neurodivergence really evolves as the individual gets older, just as we, ordinary, normal, so called neurotypical, I hate the word normal, I should not have said normal, neurotypical people or non neurodivergent people present is of a sort of a behaviors and traits that do change as time goes on. And it's the same for people who are autistic and people who are have ADHD, etc. When they grow up and they develop, they also change and their presentations and their behaviors change. So as a child, an autistic child in your family may present in a particular way, which is very aligned with being a child. But once they are older and they're in the workplace, that presentation will change significantly. And that's primarily down to masking. So a lot of autistic people in particular, but also ADHDers also mask. People with dyslexia, I know, mask. They find coping mechanisms to be able to cover up for their neurotype, which is really not a helpful thing to do because it's detrimental to their well-being, and also it's not helping the world to understand that different people have different ways of working, different ways of thinking, different ways of being and behaving. And it's really important for everyone to understand that. So, when I talk about what neurodivergence looks like at work, I'm talking about those presentations. If someone is perceived to be rude, in quotation marks, I'm not saying that people are rude, but people are often perceived to be rude. People are perceived to be abrupt when they are particularly autistic, or very literal. So they will say things in a very matter of fact way and understand things in a very matter of fact way and communicate things in a very matter of fact way. And that's not the same as talking about a lack of intelligence. It's not that at all. There is no evidence at all. There are neurodivergent people, autistic people, ADHDs with learning differences, but they're not necessarily, they don't go hand in hand. So that literality of communication, that simplicity is just down to the neurotype, but it has nothing to do with not understanding complexity or not being able to absorb and retell complexity. It's just that they are often very literal, not always, but often very literal in the way that they communicate and the way that they understand communication. Um, and so the abruptness and the so called rudeness goes alongside of that because the literality means this is this and this is that. Often things are laid out in a black and white way, the way that a neurodivergent mind works, often an autistic mind in particular, works is in a very black and white way. It presents things in a black and white way. Um, in the open, inside, it's a different story. There's a lot of complexity going on there, but and visuals in pictures and imagery is often how autistic people think. But in the real world of work, that is presented often as quite abrupt and rude in the eyes of stakeholders. So, as a manager, I always like to advise and help and consult around that space. How do you support your neurodivergent team member when stakeholders are complaining about them constantly? And I talk to many managers where that is the case. So, there's, feedback, a constant stream of negative feedback about the individual. And the manager often feels obliged to somehow put in place some punitive action some kind of punishment to, to demonstrate, the correct way, or to correct them, to communicate in a way that is aligned with stakeholders. And when you think about that particular situation, it's quite complex. So if you have an individual stakeholder who likes to work in a particular way, has a particular personality, has a certain mood and way of doing things at work, we've all come across people like that in a working environment where we know, oh, John, or Sarah, or Simon, they can be a bit like this, and so you adjust the way that you communicate with those individuals, because you know what the outcome will be if you talk to them in a way that perhaps you would talk to Anne, in accounts, or um, Tracy in HR. They're all very different. So Tracy in HR may be really relaxed and have a bit of a laugh with you and not mind banter, and in fact enjoy it and encourage it. And she may be someone you can talk to in a very relaxed way. But for example, Simon in accounts may be quite rigid, maybe quite senior, or perceive himself as senior. We've come across individuals like that too, who are not necessarily senior in the hierarchy, but believe they are, and are given that kudos and that standing in the organization by their stakeholders and their peers and their managers and their leaders. And so there's a deference that's required in those instances just to keep the peace. Whether or not it's right is a completely different affair. So as a manager, when you're faced with stakeholder complaints, stakeholder negative feedback, it's really important that you understand how to mitigate those, and to support your team member. And neurodivergent people, as I said before, are not unintelligent. They can understand, but sometimes it's necessary to be able to have that conversation with them in a very distinct way. So you explain that stakeholder A prefers this style of communication. I know that you like written communication. Often autistic people in particular will like to write down communication. Others may prefer verbal communication. And so, as a manager, it's your responsibility, as well as the team member, to be able to co create a way to be able to handle stakeholders. And we all know how important stakeholder management can be. It's the make or break for many managers, the make or break for many teams. And the way that organizations work, particularly matrix style organizations that have complex structures and hierarchies, it's super important to be able to make relationships, to build relationships, to have trust, to interdepartmental collaboration is key to success, for many projects and for many teams. And so, you as a manager, it's in your interest to be able to understand how to help your neurodivergent team members to build those relationships, to build that trust, and to get that agency to really go forward. And Brian, thank you so much for your comments. I've just seen it pop up. Yeah, you're very welcome. I mean, that's my whole business now, speaking about neurodivergence. And I talk to many ERGs, employee resource groups, across the world about neurodivergence. And there are neurodivergent ERGs now being set up. I think for the last sort of 5 years, I've seen them pop up in organizations to support neurodivergent people. And so it's really nice to see that you are president of the ERG, on accessibility. You say that you often discuss with neurodivergent employees how we could best accommodate and support each of them. And that's a totally important element of an ERG's remit, is to not just ask for stories. Often that's the case, isn't it? Where you have an ERG and all the pressures on the individuals to tell, show, explain. And that's great. Of course, you need that feedback and that input, but that's often unrewarded, and the onus is on them to constantly be teaching and educating. But actually, it's everyone's responsibility to learn. And if you are offering that support, then that's amazing. But ERGs, we know, are often standalone, not necessarily given much budget, if any at all. And I don't know what it's like in your business, Brian. I know we worked together many years ago, but every business is different. I have come across businesses where they are allocated a decent budget. They're given room for training, room for to bring in speakers, room for coaching managers, and that's the bit that I really advocate, because without the manager's support, without the manager training and knowledge and awareness, there isn't really any change that can happen in the long term. And ERG can do its best in isolation, but unless the managers are understanding what's coming out of those meetings and being given the tools to be able to support their team members, then and they will have many of them, even if they're not disclosed. They may not even be diagnosed. There are many neurodivergent people in a working environment, 1 in 5 in the global environment. So yes, I mean they are there. So it's pivotal for managers to be able to get that support in terms of training and coaching. I hear you, Brian. Very little budget. I mean, I've often seen no budget at all. So the fact that you have something, even if it's small, is better than many organisations have. So yeah, well done for running your EIG. And if you need me to come or you'd like me to come and speak at your ERG, I'd be more than happy to do so. It's something that I really enjoy because I've worked with ERGs, I've set up ERGs, and they can be amazing. We all know that. They can be an amazing space to build relationships, to get support, to find out, find knowledge and information. And yes, great executive sponsorship and support is amazing too, Brian. That's fantastic that you've got that. And I've seen that actually in most instances, I have to say that a lot of organizations do get leadership sponsorship advocacy at the leadership level, even at the CEO level. So, because often, leaders will be able to tell you a story about neurodivergence themselves. And as I mentioned earlier, I don't know if you're on the session then, I talked about children. Everyone can tell a tale about a neurodivergent child, but they don't necessarily make that connection between the neurodivergent child and the neurodivergent employee or even the neurodivergent manager or leader. They are there, but people tend to ignore it and think that it disappears, somehow between childhood and entering the working environment. It doesn't, it just evolves. And, people adapt the way that they behave as they get older. And obviously, they learn that certain behaviors are not perceived well or perceived negatively. And so they mask, which is not a healthy response, but many people do it. Many autistic people do mask. Others are unable to and just are very open about their neurodivergence. Some people are masking but don't know they're neurodivergent. So you've got a whole complex mix of, different ways of presenting in working environments. But it's really key for managers to be able to understand how neurodivergence can present in working environments and be able to support their team members to be themselves and to contribute. But yes, I mean it's fantastic to have these conversations and to be able to talk to people on LinkedIn and make those connections. So if you do want to ask me a question, please feel free to stick it in the chat. I'm only on live for 15 minutes, 20 minutes every Tuesday. Normally I'm on from 1:30 p.m. UK time, GMT. So if you do have a question, you can join the live session or you can email me at katesiche@wheretolookcoms.co.uk, or you can DM me on LinkedIn. I'm always on LinkedIn. I post regularly. So if you do have a question, I will answer it straight away. If you don't feel comfortable joining a live session, not everyone feels comfortable being live. So Yeah, thank you so much for those of you who joined. Brian, I really appreciate you so much. And it's lovely to see you. I haven't heard from you for a long time, but I do see you on LinkedIn. Very nice for you to join. Thank you so much for the support. And LinkedIn user who's anonymous, thank you for joining too. And those of you who are watching on playback, thank you so much for being part of this. I'm always available on LinkedIn. You can find me at Kate Asiche, or you can email me or visit my website, which is wheretolookcoms.co.uk to find out about my services. But in the meantime, wishing you all a wonderful New Year's Eve and a brilliant 2026. For now, I wish you a good day, and thank you so much for listening and for participating. Cheers. Bye.